This is the thing when I host anything. I need energy. I need energy back. We're going to work hard for you up here. So we need to know that you're out there. My name is Xavier Jernigan. I'm the head of cultural partnerships at Spotify. Everybody calls me X. So y'all say, what up, X?
What up, X?
Y'all can do better than that. Say, what up, X?
What up, X?
That's so much better. Thank you. Y'all feel that warmed you up, right? You're at the Sound of Storytelling panel. We're excited to be here with you all at Cannes. I love that I could wear shades on this panel and not feel pretentious, because I have a lot of shades and I love to wear them. So we're just going to talk about storytelling and the role that audio is playing and how it's evolving in this age. Right now we're in the second age of audio, the second golden age of audio. The first golden age was when people had big wooden radios and people sat around and listened to episodes of Amos and Andy and Superman as a family. And now we've entered into a second golden age of audio. And we have a lot of research that we did with Gen Zers and millennials that we just released. And 81% of them said that audio and reducing screen time is a big point of interest for them. They want to get away and unplug from visual stimulation. So they're trying to step away from that, and there are different ways that they're engaging in this audio. So we're going to talk about that a bit. We have an amazing panel for you guys. I have to my immediate left, TT Shadia, co-host of Dope Labs, a Spotify original podcast. Can y'all give it up for her? Thank you. Her partner in crime and co-host, Zakiya Watley. Give it up for her. They entered into and won the first ever Sound Up Bootcamp that we did at Spotify. We wanted to give a platform for underrepresented voices in this medium. In particular, women of color have been and still are vastly underrepresented in the medium. They entered into this bootcamp that we had, so they were flown up with 10 other women for a week, and then they got just this extensive training in how to put podcasts together and how to tell their story. So Dope Labs is the first representation of that. It's one of my favorite podcasts right now. Next up, we have Jeffrey Colon. I'm going to read the screen because it could look like I'm facing you while I'm reading the screen. They would have never known it, but we keep this real personal, real casual. Head of Microsoft Advertising Brand Studio. Give it up for Jeffrey, please. And then last but not least, we have Kathy Boxell. She's the head of brand entertainment at the Story Lab. Can you give it up for Kathy? We have a lot to cover in only a little bit of time, so we're going to jump right in. Just to warm you guys up, what's your favorite podcast that you're listening to right now? You guys first, and I'll go last. Whoever wants to go, let's start at the end.
Okay, I'll go first. I'm listening to one that's called You Must Remember This. It's a history of Hollywood and Hollywood sex scandals. Probably nothing worse than's going on here right now over this week, but I highly recommend it if you like Hollywood, entertainment, and scandal.
Oh, so one of my favorite podcasts right now is from Myleik Till. It's called My Taught You. And so it's everything to really get your business up and going and to kind of just keep your life tidy. I recommend it.
My favorite podcast right now is called Ear Hustle.
Yeah.
It is set up in the San Quentin Penitentiary in California, and it just talks about life in the prison system. It's really, really good.
Jeff.
I like Encyclopedia Womanica. It's a daily podcast. If you're a fan of Howard Zinn's The People History of the United States, this is talking about women in history. I listen to it with my 2 daughters, and it's awesome. You realize how much women actually have changed the world, but we've erased them many times.
That's good. You can give it up for him. Mine will get no applause. Mine is Till Death Do Us Part. It's a true story that takes place in my college town, like where I went to college in Tallahassee, Florida. And it was about this Jewish couple that got married, and it was all beautiful and all nice. And then he turned up dead, the husband. And then it's about figuring out what happened. They think the wife did it or her family did it. So it's really, really good. That will get no applause, but I'm telling you, it's really, really good. Clap for it. I'm all for murder and death and mystery.
And love.
And love. And love that goes bad when it's not mine, when it's not my love. Jeffrey, we're going to start with you. We were talking about the value of podcasts. Let's get your opinion on this. You're both a marketer and a podcast creator yourself. What makes podcasts a good connection between listeners and the creators?
I mean, I think I'll geek out on this for a second and look at the biological aspect. Dr. Tom Rice from Exeter College in the UK has been talking about this concept known as the privatization of audio space. What that is we're all born with eyelids, which allow us to keep things out of our eyes, but we don't have earlids. And in fact, the only way you can keep me out of your ears right now is if you plugged your ears. And what that has allowed us to have more of is headphones have become basically a big part of our life, especially over-the-ear headphones with Dr. Dre and Beats making it a cultural sort of fascination. I think, what we have now with this space is the ability to pretty much connect with any subject we want to, with real people who we relate to. And we don't really think about the brand so much. We're really thinking about the content, and it's the best native form, and always has been, of advertising, because you don't insert ads into podcasts. We have people who are the hosts who read those, and it basically is returning us to that golden era.
TT and Zakia, why did you pick podcasting as the medium to tell your stories? Like tell us about I heard about the story about the bar and all of that. Can you take them into how your story came about and why you thought it needed to be a podcast? Why?
So Zakia and I met in graduate school back in about 2011 or 2012 in North Carolina. And we would go out with each other to bars and things like that. And people would come up to us and say, oh, what do you guys do? And we would say, oh, we're scientists. And they would be like, really? I said, yeah. Scientists can't drink whiskey. And then they would just start asking us all of these questions. It seems like they had all of these pent-up scientific questions that they never had answered as they were getting older. And they were like, can you explain this to me? What is buoyancy? I don't really get that, and things like that. And
people ask you about buoyancy in a bar?
Yes.
They have no
boats,
game.
How do they stay up? I don't know.
No game. Don't ask women about buoyancy in a bar, please.
But then we would have these amazing conversations with them to help them understand these scientific principles, or if we didn't know the answer, just an amazing conversation about what the answer might be. So going through the scientific method with them and having really fun conversations. So we realized that there was a definite space for something like this, and we chose podcasting because the barrier to entry was so low. Anyone can have a podcast. If you have a cell phone, you can have a podcast.
Yeah.
And so we were like, this is something that we could definitely do, and we think that there's a need for it, and that it would be a lot of fun. So that's how Dope Labs was born.
Well, you then, talk about the relationship you have with your fans.
So I think we've really kind of had the opportunity to kind of nurture a community of people who are interested, not just interested in science, but just curious in general, right? So what we try to promote, both with people that we talk to on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, we just try to promote curiosity, right? And so we've tried to be really intentional on the show to really not position ourselves as experts, but to kind of say, hold my hand, let's walk through this and figure out, what your question might be. I think what we've tried to do as far as topically is to avoid kind of coming off as these are the facts and you should just care about them because they're facts. What we're really trying to do is to situate it in some cultural context, like something that's happening now. This is why you should care about stars, because Beyonce's documentary just came out. She's a star.
Yeah.
But what really makes a star, right? So then we go into all of those things. And so we kind of jump from point A to B to J, right? But in doing that, it makes people feel like they can ask their wildest questions or something that they may be embarrassed to ask. And people are asking us, oh, yes. And I'm like, you have to talk to your doctor about that. But that's kind of the community that we're trying to build, where you can ask us anything.
Right. So a version of crowdsourcing almost too, which is an important element to your show, that you actually go out to the people, and that's a big part of the. You want to talk about that and how that came into being?
Yeah, we're really reactionary with the show. So we get our episode topics from Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Whatever people are talking about, we take that topic and then show how there's some type of science in
related to it, yeah. And I think one of the things that we really enjoy doing is not just saying, what does this mean to me as a scientist, but what does this mean to the man on the street? So we also incorporate voices, right? So we go out at night and and ask people, hey, will you talk into this microphone about what you think about genetic testing or what you think about
Hair loss.
Hair
or,
loss, yeah.
Or dating.
I love that episode, by the way. I love
yeah.
it.
And so I think that's one of the things that we really are trying to do. That's kind of crowdsourcing in a way.
Yeah. If you listen to the Wakanda Friends episode, fun fact, you will hear my voice pop up. I'm a man on the street in one of the episodes. So we had a good conversation. Kathy, this is for you. Podcasting is a really intimate space that, hosts like TT and Zakia have created. How do you insert yourself into that space as a marketer without being invasive or inauthentic?
Yeah, I think you do have to be really careful. And as Jeff said, you can get your messages into podcasting, and working with the host, working with the talent, there are ways to add that creativity and add that authenticity to your messages. But I think what's really interesting is taking it kind of to the next level and thinking about, can you really integrate within the content? So, for example, we did a partnership recently for a client of ours, Kellogg's, where we worked with Love Island. I'm sure everyone knows Love Island. Massive TV property. But we actually created a podcast, an original podcast around that property. And as part of that, we had, rather than having, we had traditional sponsorship messages there, but as well, we tried to create integrated segments within the show. So, it felt more organic. It wasn't in every show, but it just felt more organic. It was more of a kind of fun way to play around the themes of the brand. So we had like little segments like Who's the Biggest Flake, or Bowled Over, which was about the couple that had fallen in love hardest that week, that kind of stuff. So I think it's fun to kind of play, as long as it feels organic and it feels like it's the right fit for the show. But I do think the most important thing, the most exciting bit is, as we do at Storylab, is to try and create new properties. So for brands to think about, are there ways to actually co-create from scratch with the talent and actually make your own shows and your own content? I think that's a really exciting space.
Creativity and data is the theme today here at Dentsu. So, Kathy, we're going to stay with you. Branded content has been around forever, and historically, Storylabs has worked more in the visual space. How are you flexing those storytelling skills, some of that you just talked about, but how are you doing that in audio and podcasting? How do you use data to inform that messaging?
I mean, podcasts, as far as we're concerned, is just another form of entertainment. And we are approaching it in exactly the same way that we would for our brand clients with a film or a TV series or a digital series. It's all about the story. It's all about the creativity. It's making something that's relevant for your audience. And, the guys who are just talking about tapping into their audience passions, it's a really passionate, engaged audience. So understanding what those passions are, working with the right creators, the right talent, the right distribution platforms who are able to kind of take your message where it needs to go and make something that's relevant for your audience. I think from a data perspective, again, going back to my Love Island example, that's just a stage that we go through when we're trying to identify what those audience passions are. So, with something like Love Island, we knew Kellogg's really wanted to talk to like a 16 to 34 audience. We knew they were super obsessed with their mobiles. I think we had some crazy stat that like 70% of them don't look up from their mobile when they're crossing the road. We knew they were very mobile obsessed, and we also knew that around Love Island, the internet sort of online searches for Love Island content were really spiking in the mornings after the shows, but there was no content there. So it was a great opportunity for a brand like Kellogg's. Obviously, morning is huge for them. To try and bring all of that together and create something original. I think that's where the sort of intersection of creativity and data and finding something that really, really resonates for your audience.
TT and Zakia, as scientists, obviously research is a big part of your background and your everyday. How do you use data and insights with your research background, your extensive research background, to inform your planning process for the podcast?
I feel like we can never have enough data. That's kind of my approach. But I think when we start thinking about topics, as part of what TT has already said, is that we try to be both reactionary, so we want to know what's going on, but also planning a little bit to kind of steer conversation. So we try to think of some anchor points for what might be happening. What kind of trends do we see, cyclically? Like what's going to happen every year around this time? What are some of the conversations that always come up on Twitter? Right. What always comes up on Instagram? And so we build content around that. But then we also have to kind of know when to kind of push away from those things.
So it's relatable still.
Yeah, and to also add a little bit of qualitative information that we're getting. So feedback from our listeners, people that are saying, hey, this is going on, and thinking, you know, sheer numbers and who pops up to whose I guess interests are valued in the media.
Yeah.
Right, but then also thinking about who is our target audience and how do we recenter those folks for our topics. And so I think that's part of, it's like taking the data, but also kind of turning away from it at certain points when we want to really engage our audience and center them.
Right, highlighting members of our global community that aren't necessarily talked about in the podcast space. Because, I mean, as minority women in science, we know what that feels like when we enter into a space that we don't really see ourselves in. So with some of our episodes, we try to really keep that in mind and center people and make them the topic of the show, make them the star, or do a topic that we know speaks directly to them and says, hey, we know you're out there and we're making content for you as well.
Jeffrey, and talking about how brands can get involved, can we talk a little bit about Microsoft's Future podcast? Because it's branded entertainment, but it's still entertaining. And I think you run a risk when it's branded content that it could be, you know, come off contrived. So can you talk a bit about like how you pulled that off and how that ladders up to your overall brand goals?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems brands have when they say, let's create a podcast, is they go with the simple format of, okay, we'll bring a bunch of people on to interview. That's probably the most boring thing that a brand can do. The more exciting things are really going out and trying to find the interesting stories. Like T&Z said, how do you inspire people? I mean, I think that's really what a branded podcast can do. If the takeaway at the end of the day is, wow, I really have a different perception about that company being interesting and innovative, then you win, because you're basically creating mind share and you're educating people. You're teaching them maybe things they didn't know about. So I think those are the hidden stories that, you know, you want to do as a brand. It doesn't always have to ladder. It shouldn't be treated like performance marketing. I think what we've entered is a world where everyone thinks this is what we want to say, and then we'll have people do that. That's a very Neanderthal way of looking at how humans emotionally connect with others.
What's the right balance of the storytelling element and then letting people know it's actually a branded podcast? Like that's a trick. So how do you pull that off in a way? I
mean, I think a lot of it is you have maybe special segments that tie into the themes that your company is around. If you're trying to get people to think about cloud computing, you don't necessarily want to say, let's do a whole segment on cloud computing. You might do a whole segment on medicine and how medicine is basically empowered through the cloud. Things that again are keeping people see that it's immersive. It's basically the wallpaper that they're able to make those connections.
So for Kathy, this is for you too. Our host reads the new product placement.
Host, oh gosh. You said you weren't going to go off script. Now you've gone and asked me crazy things.
I told you that.
Do you know? I would say yes, they probably are, but I agree with what Jeff was saying there. I think it is about taking it to a deeper level than that. You know, we've all seen product placement on TV and film. It's becoming wallpaper, essentially. I think it is about creating something that is much more deep connection with the audience, much more integrated, much more creative. Working with the talent definitely is the next stage.
TT and Zakia, how do you want a brand to engage with you guys in your audience?
So our podcast is sponsored by 3M. And I think one of the things that made 3M a great partner for us was their willingness to kind of let us move around, a little flexibility, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we do is, we have, yes, host reads, but we also have things that speak to our direct experience. Mm-hmm. So I was in the process of moving while we were recording, and I said, 3M is the only reason that I'm getting my security deposit back, right? And so that's not necessarily what they may have wanted to say, right? But it rang true with our audience, and they always say to us, like, oh, I love when you guys use that placement. Yeah. And similar to what Jeff was saying, when we think about directly aligning what we're talking about with our sponsor, so like the Wakanda episode, TT is a material scientist and was our expert, and we kind of talked about some of the new materials, things that are happening in the engineering world and the material science world, but we were able to kind of link it to innovation, which is what 3M is really known for.
Do you have a list of brands that you do and don't want to work with?
Yeah, we do. I think that we want to work with brands that we feel like get what we're trying to do with the show. and like respect that, and then also enjoy our audience and how diverse it is, and want to reach those people. So that's usually brands that communicate that to us, like, hey, listen, we get it, we love it, and you guys are talking to people who we want to get to too. And we're like, we love that. If a brand has a history of being exclusive to certain groups, then we likely won't work with them. But yeah, we're always open to talking and figuring that out. Yeah.
Kathy, back to you. This is on script, so don't worry.
Okay, fine.
What type of guidance do you give brands who are entering the podcast space for the first time?
I think, as well as what I've talked about trying to be a little bit more creative and original in the way they approach it, I think there's also some kind of logistical things to think about. I think often, as with anything, these guys have spent years building up their audience, kind of understanding their audience. I think for brands, it's not something where you can just dive straight in off the bat and kind of do it cold. It is all about finding the right partners to work with. So whether that is your talent, whether that is your creative talent, whether that is your distribution partner, as someone like Spotify, it's making sure that, you're working with experts in the field who understand what they're doing. I think also, as we're always audience first and we're always trying to make sure we've got the distribution in place, it is making sure that you have those platforms that you're working with and you're kind of aware that your audience is able to find what they're looking for, so making yourself available. And we know from experience, a lot of our brand clients have tried to do this, put podcasts in very weird places that are hard for people to find. So biggest amount of platforms possible and best creative talent would be my tip.
What about brands that are unsure about tapping into podcasting?
I would say, from a brand perspective, we make a lot of films, we make a lot of TV series and digital series. This obviously wouldn't be my first way to sell podcasts, but I would say, it's quite a low point of entry for brands. It's a really easy way for you to test that audience, for you to play around, be a bit more creative, have direct access to talent like these guys, that possibly when you're working in a more established space like film or TV, you wouldn't get that level of access and expertise. So, yeah, I think it's an amazing opportunity for brands.
Jeffrey, anything to add to that?
Yeah, it's in this day and age, it's also easy. Anybody can be in any part of the world, and most audio or most podcasting software integrates with Skype or basically just your mobile phone. So you could basically say to anybody, where are you? Oh, I'm in this part of the world. Hey, let's talk at this time, and we'll record the interview. So it doesn't limit you by physicality, which video and film does. You have to have the person there on the spot to do that. That's not the case with podcasting or audio.
Our goal at Spotify is to be the #1 audio platform in the world, obviously tapping into music and podcasting, the potential of it. And in my job at Spotify as the head of cultural partnerships, I really look at it as extending narratives and storytelling into music and into the podcast space. What do you guys see as the untapped potential of audio storytelling and brands' ability to tap into that? This is for all the panelists. Kathy, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm okay. I would say, I think what's really interesting is, again, we're working across a range of different entertainment areas. And I would say we're seeing a real kind of convergence in terms of the sort of audiovisual space and the audio space. So I think a good example of that is there was a show, I'm sorry, it's a bit of a UK-focused example, but there was a show in the UK called People Just Do Nothing, which was on BBC Three, really funny, set in a pirate radio station. Ran for a few series on BBC Three, but they've actually decided to bring back the new series as a podcast. So rather than, creating the podcast around the TV show, this is directly releasing the show as a podcast. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think the opportunity for brands is brilliant because you can look at bringing back shows that are popular with your audience, working directly with those talent to create new shows. I think it's a really, really exciting kind of brave new world.
I think if you are a person who wants to be an author in this day and age, and publishers are probably going to be upset that I say this, don't get a book deal. It's not worth it. Do a podcast, then get the book deal. We're seeing this now where almost films are being made from podcasts.
Yep. Shows.
Almost everything is being sourced from them, which of course gets a lot of the sort of scam artists to enter the space. But I think if you're true to the art form, people will find that quality. But I think almost everything's being sourced from this area in terms of, future entertainment and future thought leadership.
Yeah. TT Zakia.
One of the things that I think is kind of untapped is thinking about podcasting in a less conventional way, right? So I think people often think, a podcast, 30 minutes to an hour, this many times a week. But there are also people that would listen, but you have to think about the who you have to be to have 30 minutes to an hour to just spend with something. So why not 6 to 7 minutes, right? Or 8 minutes? I think that there's a lot there where people kind of push back against what the format of a podcast is, and I think there's a lot of room to play around there.
I agree.
Yeah, can I add one thing to that?
Yeah, of course.
So I have, I've always had trouble as a parent getting my kids to brush their teeth. And I was in Germany, and the CEO of Gimlet Media was like, "Hey, Jeff, have you checked out this thing called Chompers?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "What the hell is this?" So he's like, say, Alexa, open Chompers. It's a twice a day podcast, basically, that is a fun fact that gets your kids to brush their teeth for 2 minutes. I must say I'm really excited I found that, because that is a unique way, going back to your point, of something that is not traditional. What's the brand integration there? I think Crest might be slightly involved in it, but you don't really know that at the end of the day, because the creative is so good. So if it gets back to that creative team, I hope they continue to produce it, because it's really been helpful to, I know, myself and other parents who have always had trouble getting their kids to brush their teeth.
Yeah, one thing I want to see different TV shows and different properties do episodes that are like bonus episodes, but do it as a podcast. What was the conversation that took place before the scene in the show? What's that thing you don't know about? What's the second storyline? How about it's a podcast between seasons? And then people can drive right there and go, and it's actually advancing the storytelling arc and the narrative of the show.
I think, and my producer's here, Jonathan, who produces my show, but he said this, the Beastie Boys did basically something that is really interesting. They produced I guess it was a 5-minute video for their audio documentary. I mean, we're now in a world where the video is going the other way around. Right. And we're like, audio documentary, which I think also is something they stole from the Clash documentary that Spotify did. So everybody's sort of stealing from each other and creating new creative things. So it's going to be interesting over the next year.
And we're doing the same thing. We're using YouTube clips and different things to drive on platform. So we're out of time, guys. Shameless plug. I'm a podcast host myself. Spotify, we're doing our podcast, Culture Now Streaming. It's a daily recap of what's happening here in Cannes. We're bringing you into what's happening. We have everybody coming through, from our founder and CEO, Daniel Ek. A lot of different CEOs and CMOs are coming through. TT and Zakia, I'm going to interview them tomorrow for the podcast. It's out every single day. The first episode from Cannes just dropped a second ago, so it's live now. Is that right, Meg? So it's live right now. Go check it out. If you go over to the Spotify beach, you may see me in the studio recording at any time. Thank you for coming out. Listen to Dope Labs, please. Check it out. Follow it. Thank you, guys. Enjoy Cannes. Au revoir. Thank you, guys.